Okay. I believe that we should be happening. And there's the first comment from Kelly. Hello, Kelly. Good to see you. Okay, everybody. I think we're all happening here, at least to the best that I can manage it. Microphones on? Yes, microphones on. Camera, lights, action, hooray! Anyway, so I am here despite a last minute panic of sorts. Um, oh, come on. Come back here. Where did you go? All right. Anyway, there was a short panic when I got here and started to set things up about 6:30 or so and checked everything and then went away and came back and tried to get onto Facebook, and it suddenly was doing me that thing of you're not logged in, which makes no sense whatsoever, especially since the last time I used Facebook was last night when I was doing a broadcast. So anyway, and then of course the excuse me while I adjust my glasses here. The very same thing that always happens in these situations happens, which is it has my old email address, and it's, for some reason it's sending things to my old email address, but it's also telling me that it's sending text to my phone, which is right next to me. And it's not sending text to my phone. That is very obvious because I keep looking at the text and none has shown up. So I went through like 10 minutes of panic with this because, of course, if I can't get onto Facebook, we can't do this, which might be a relief to some, but would be an irritation to me and perhaps a few other hapless souls out there. So anyway, and then all of a sudden, about my third time trying the same exact series of things, it sent me a text to my phone and I was able to get in. So no reason for it whatsoever, just a burp in the system, just a machine fart of some kind, but it's just stressful and strenuous at the last possible moment when you're trying to get ready to do something. God bless technology. I love it. Don't you? Deb and I have lots of conversations about this, about the days when we were told about how great everything was going to be in the paperless future. What they didn't tell us is the paperless future was going to, in fact, be the future of 17,000 passwords, which you're supposed to keep track of, and yet keep secure at the same time. So, and keep secure through changes of email address, phone number, et cetera, somehow. And I, in the course of desperately trying to figure out why my password was not working, when there was no reason it shouldn't. And eventually it did work once I had the backup code that they texted to me finally. In the course of doing that, I pulled down one of my, it's like passwords that are embedded in the system here in my laptop. And there was like 25 or 30 of them. And I realized like none of them did I recognize. None of them had anything to do with anything that I was aware of. So either somebody else, some elves, are stealing it at night to use my machine, or I am suffering from rolling amnesia of some kind, or I don't know. I don't know. It's beyond me. Anyway, how are you? Good to see you. It is the last day of the 4-day Thanksgiving weekend here in the United States. I'm not assuming that everybody tuned into this particular reading is in the United States, although it does tend to favor the U.S. time zones. Anyway, and yeah, we had a very night, for those who didn't hear my last night, my early morning reading, we had a very nice Thanksgiving, despite a great deal of family toing and froing and, some domestic crises and all that. But we eventually sat down and had a meal together, a small meal, but my family was dispersed. I think all of my brothers and sisters-in-law were doing things at their own place. So we had a very small, intimate family Thanksgiving, which was fine with me. I love my family. So it's not like I'm saying, thank God I didn't have to hang out with my family, because I'm really lucky. I have people that I really enjoy hanging out with in my family and just love and admire. But it's just simpler. We didn't have to drive anywhere. We went the lazy way because of various things and just got in some Thanksgiving type meals, and It was nice. It was nice. It was calm. We all got to sit around the table and eat and talk, and it was just nice. So no complaints there. And anything else I needed to mention? No, we're in mad mode as usual. We've got somebody coming tomorrow to appraise the house that we're living in, which, for those of you who know the details or have heard some of the details, is my parents' house. My parents, having passed on, died. I hate that euphemism, passed on. It's just kind of, I don't hate it, but it irritates me. It feels like not being willing to admit what actually happened. My parents both died in the last year and a half, which, is not something I want to make smaller or make more acceptable. I'm not for it. I'm against it. But it happened. And as a result, we've been living in my parents' house while hanging on to our house. And we're planning to move back around the first of the year. So we've got somebody coming in tomorrow to, do estimates of what the house is worth, or at least what the major things are that need to be looked at. I don't know. I didn't arrange it. So, but as a result, we spent a great deal of today cleaning just to make sure whoever this guy is, that he has access to, places he needs to measure and stuff. Because, as I've mentioned before, because we moved in here in May, and then my dad got sick again, or sicker, because he was already quite ill and infirm, but he got sick again in sort of late June, and he died in July. And at which point we realized we weren't going to be staying here for any length of time. We had originally thought we might be here for a couple of years. So, everything kind of went boom, up in the air. We never unpacked. We've got boxes everywhere. The living room, I don't even know I can't even come up with a simile for what the living room looks like. We got stuff stacked everywhere. So we did our best to make space for people to get around and to eliminate any actual near fatal hazards in the household so this appraiser can appraise. So that's what we did today. And so my brain is tired and fuzzy, but not so much so that I can't read, and I will read. And I just had a cup of coffee, so I have perked up slightly. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I mentioned last night that I'm working on the last of the Ordinary Farm books, and that my wrist is well enough now that I've been able to kind of get a bit of a what's the word I'm looking for? Just a pattern going where I can write almost every day, and as long as I'm kind of careful of it and be aware that when it starts to ache a bit, that means it's going to be worse in about half an hour, so I'd better stop then. And let me think, anything else? No, just life in all its complexity and in all its strangeness. The news is horrifying, as always. So, but as I said, I'm kind of intent on keeping this non-political. But it's frustrating sometimes when you look at the god-awful mess that people are making of this planet and of their countries and all of those things, and the harm that they are doing to other people. It hurts my heart. It really does. But we're not going to solve that here. At least I don't think we will. If anybody thinks we can, let me know, and I'll pass it along to the relevant authorities. But meanwhile, of course, we're doing what most people do during times of worry and frustration, which is, you just try and take care of your own and do whatever you can for those in need. And that's kind of the mode that we're in and have been in since COVID, really. Which leads me in a long and somewhat non-circular circle, an ellipse, as it were. It leads me in an elliptical sense to reading, which is what I started doing during COVID, because I figured what's something that I can do from home that might be of some interest to people, and at a time when people are stuck, were stuck at home. And that's what I've been doing, and I will continue doing it for a while. Although, as I've mentioned before, I'm just about run out of things to read. So I'm thinking about, what can come next. So that's on my mind. Anything else? You see, now, if I was doing an actual broadcast, I would have planned some of the things I was going to say. I would have actually a script or at the very least notes. And instead, I'm just sitting here in front of my laptop, just kind of letting you folks have the benefit of my loopiness without any pre-thought or prefabrication whatsoever. Yeah, I think that's about it, really. Just getting ready to move, getting ready to deal with the holidays, which I did also mention this last night, which are terrifying to me because we have like four family birthdays, all cycled around Christmas. You know, we're in the month and something before and the month and something after Christmas. And of course, Christmas itself, which although we are not religious, we are one of our few religious things is that we are religious about having to do Christmas every year, which means, you know, Christmas tree, presents, blah, blah, blah. Although we don't actually know where we're going to be celebrating this year. I'd like it to be here, but we may not be able to. So that's what's going on with me. Just the usual stuff. I hope things are going well for all of you. I don't have any complaints at the moment, except that my daughter has, one of our kids has COVID, and so we're worrying about her and hoping that she gets better soon. She's had it once already, so I hope that's a mitigating factor. And of course, the rest of us are hoping we don't get it. Although she was here on Thanksgiving before we knew she had been exposed. So far, so good. I was actually worrying about it last night. For those of you who know, I kind of cut off mid-scene last night, even though I was actually at the top of the hour and really at the end of when I usually do end my reading. But I was beginning to feel very scratchy in the throat, and I was going, oh my God, I hope this is not the beginnings of a resurgence of COVID, because of course I just had it a few months ago. So far, so good. Doesn't seem like it. It was a bit with quite a bit of gravelly voice from doing the character of Akinabi. And that in the late hour, I hope, was just all that was going on. Anyway, all right, so I've gone babble, babble, babble. Let me go see who showed up and who said hello. And then we will go from there and I will do some reading. So I see Kristen. Hello, Kristen. Good to have you with us as always. Lisa Hagley, a pleasure. Emily, hello. Ron, hello, my buddy. James, another buddy. Good to see you. Kim, and that's Kim Walsh. Winter, hello, Winter. Becca is here. Excellent. Melissa Fuller, a pleasure. Tracy, hi, Tracy. Margaret, good to see you too, Margaret. Ivan, my old homie, my old droog, Ivan. Ivan and I, of course, go back to the 70s together. So, and we have a very complicated and intertwined history of friendship and social network and all that stuff. So it's always a pleasure to see Ivan's name. Claudia, hello, get back up here. This thing just disappeared on me. Claudia, hello, good to see you. Barb Ann, Ray Weatherford, Kelly, who I already said hello to, Joanna McCallum, hi Joanna, and 6 more it says. Chenoa is one of them, so good to see you all. Pleasure. Joanna writes, no, I think it's supposed to say previous COVID does not mitigate effects. But the somewhere along the line it became precious COVID does not mitigate effects. Oh, it is precious, isn't it? Anyway, so yes, we are telling her to rest and rest and rest. So fortunately or unfortunately, our daughter has some other health issues. So she spends a lot of time resting anyway. So that is not a concern, but she seemed okay when I talked to her today, but we will continue. So thank you. And I guess that's everything I wanted to say and do. So now I am going to read. Yes, I'm honestly going to read. I know, it's amazing. Usually I talk for another 5 or 6 minutes. Anyway, so what's going on? And the scene I was reading last night, which I am continuing to read because we only got partway through it, is that Vieki, the father of Nezeru, and Nezeru is the half-mortal, half-Norn child of Vieki and his mortal concubine, for lack of a better word, although their relationship is actually better than that. Anyway, Vieki, who is the High Magister of the Builders, in other words, he's kind of in charge of the group that does all the construction and maintenance of Nakiga and Norn projects in general. Norns are also known as the Hikadaya, which name you will see here a few times. Vieki has been summoned to a queen's audience down deep in Nakiga, in the Chamber of the Well, a very sacred, scary spot. And it has been revealed that while Utuku, Queen Utuku, was in her 30-year-long sleep, she found the spirit of one of the Red Hand, who those of you who've read the first books, The Dragonbone Chair, Stone of Farewell to Green Angel Tower, know the Red Hand were Inaluki's sort of undead servitors who helped him in his war against the mortals and later the Scythi. So that means that... or what that meant was that Utuku had thought of a way to bring this member of the Red Hand named Omu the Whisperer, O-M-M-U, Omu the Whisperer, into the world for now the second time post-death. So this woman has more comebacks than the end of a James Brown show, or this female Norn undead spirit, whatever it is. Anyway, and began the ceremony, which, among other things, offers a mortal body to Omu to inhabit, who happens to be the grandchild, the half-mortal, half-Norn grandchild of the highest military leader of Nakiga and the Norns. And that's where we were at. And the ceremony has begun. And the reason all these nobles were brought together in the Chamber of the Well is so Utuku could use all their combined minds and strength to make this thing happen, because basically what she's doing is pulling Omu the Whisperer back from death. So anyway, I'm going to go back a couple paragraphs and start reading again. We're in the middle of the ceremony, and Vieki has already realized that this is super bad. This is not a good thing, no matter whether the queen and Akinabi are in favor of it or not. The young female victim's name is Ya Jalamu. And now I'm going to start reading from the Witchwood Crown. Ya Jalamu was thrashing harder now atop the litter. For a moment it seemed the force of her agonized struggle might break the heavy bonds that held her. Then her bones began to glow. First the skull bloomed behind the girl's face, a hot light that made her pale skin glow like the oiled parchment of a lantern. Next her grasping hands became things of fierce radiance, and smoke began to rise from garments torn and disarranged by her struggles. Within moments her clothing curled and darkened, becoming smoke and ash even as it lay against her ivory skin, until the marshal's granddaughter was all but naked, legs and arms wreathed in flame, all her secrets exposed to the staring multitude. Then Ya Jalamu's flesh itself caught fire. It licked upward even from her mouth and nostrils and the corner of her eyes. Then, in an instant, all her skin blazed into light. She threw her head back, and steam gushed from her sagging mouth. Shivers of burning red climbed out of her throat to splash flame in all directions over the litter, but the conveyance was made of ancient cured witchwood, and mere fire would not harm it. Only the girl burned. It was all Vieki could do to keep his knees locked, to remain upright. He felt as though he were ablaze too, but instead of his flesh it was his thoughts, his certainties that were burning away into ash. Very soon there was nothing to be seen of Ya Jalamu, but a faint movement in the depths of the fire, a flutter of ash, a pair of black sticks waving. The heat was so intense that the air shimmered and grew untrustworthy, but Vieki still had not felt it, and the singers crouched around the litter seemed not to feel it either. Oops, heart saying, hang it skipped ahead a couple of places. Where did it go? There we go. Okay. The heat was so intense that the air shimmered and grew untrustworthy, but Vieki still had not felt it, and the singers crouched around the litter seemed not to feel it either. A few paces from the heart of the blaze, Queen Utuku stared down on the spectacle from behind her featureless mask. Vieki could no more guess at her thought than he could have supposed the desires of a distant star. But a part of his own thought still resonated with the queen's, and as he stared at her, he felt something come through from the dark reaches beyond the world he knew. Something from that lifeless place was forcing its way out of the cold and blackness into the world of the living. As the flames began to die down, the center of the blaze was visible once more. But instead of the blackened wreckage Vieki expected to see there, a scatter of cindered bones, something else sat in the queen's litter. Something whole and strange. A figure of shifting red light, wreathed in smoke. "Amu Krai!" cried Akinabi. "Amu the Whisperer, you have again returned to us from death. May your wisdom and strength help preserve your people, the people you twice gave your life to protect." As the queen's grip on his thoughts loosened, Vieki slowly collapsed to his knees in exhausted terror, as many others around him had already done. He could not look at the shape in the litter directly. It was too strange, too angular, and seemed both far away and terrifyingly close at the same time, as though it had not entirely emerged into his own world of length and distance. Only when Akinabi and his singers rose and surrounded the shape did Vieki realize that he had been holding his breath for so long he was nearly faint. He let it out with a ragged sigh. Some of his fellow nobles had fallen insensible to the cavern floor. Others had prostrated themselves, amazed and full of veneration to see their queen cheat death itself, and exhilarated by the small part they had played in it. Then, just when even the lightless ones had fallen silent, and it seemed that the ritual had ended, the shape in the litter suddenly began to thrash in a wild but silent spasm of movement and red light. Vieki could feel it, though, a quivering touch on the membrane that separated the chamber of the harp from the regions beyond life. A violence against its tension, as though a doomed fly struggled against a web, and Vieki himself was one strand of that web. Mist swirled, obscuring the litter and its occupant. He was surprised. Could it be that Yajalamu somehow still fought for the body Akinabi stole from her? Brave heart! Brave woman! A few heartbeats later, though, he thought he could feel something much different. Something powerful that was trying to follow Omu out into the living world. An old and angry thing, full of hate. His heart sped ever faster, until he feared it might burst. The light of the well flared for a moment, bright as an earthbound sun, then dimmed as a great soundless cry of anguish made the assembled nobles grab at their heads in pain and horror. At the same moment, a palpable sense of something ending swept through the chamber, as though all the strands of the web of thought that connected them had snapped at once. It was clear that the way that they had opened into outer darkness had just closed again. "Omu! Omu! Sheshemweka!" The queen had not spoken for some time, and these sudden words boomed in Vieki's head like a blacksmith pounding at an anvil, their gloating strength bringing tears to his eyes again. "She has come back! The Whisperer! Praise her!" "Yes, praise her!" cried Akinabi. "With Amu's help, our great queen will be able to avenge all that has been done to us. We will burn the mortals from the face of the land. We will claim the Witchwood crown." The glow of the well abruptly faded to its ordinary brightness. Akinabi's minions wrapped the glowing thing in lengths of white cloth, wrapping it round and round as though it were just another corpse being prepared to wait for the garden's return. But this thing lived. though its movements seemed those of an infant, the twitching of something that had not yet mastered its own limbs. The flames were gone, but the shape itself still glowed so that the singers of Akanabi's order seemed to be swaddling a molten stone. After a time, they finished their work and stepped back from the litter. Though the figure that swayed there was wrapped head to foot in bandages, ruby light leaked between the wrappings each time it moved. Akanabi stepped up and draped a ceremonial singer's robe across the figure's shoulders, then tugged the hood forward to hide the faceless head so that nearly all the glow was hidden. Those nobles who had not lost their wits and fallen senseless to the ground watched, listless and stupefied, but their expressions seemed almost ashamed. The Queen's guards now lifted the litter and carried it and its shrouded passenger toward the arched doorway. The rest of the white-helmeted teeth stepped forward from behind the throne and began to drive the confused and largely unspeaking elite of Nakiga back across the cavern toward the stairs. It was not entirely clear what had transpired here in the chamber of the well, but Vieki sensed that all of them had been made part of some grave bargain whose end remained unknown. What truly happened? He wondered. Do we face such a terrible threat that a horror such as this, the murder of an innocent, was our only choice? Then why have we not begun to prepare against another siege? Full of such dubious, almost certainly treasonous thoughts, he did not notice Jijibo, the dreamer, approaching, until the Queen's odd descendant reached out and took his arm. Exhausted and anxious, Vieki recoiled. "Congratulations!" said Jijibo, grinning. "Hey-ya, hi! But just look at him. He's been thinking too much, and now it's made him ill." It took the bewildered Vieki a moment to realize Jijibo was talking in his bizarre way about Vieki himself. "What do you mean, congratulations?" he asked. Sorry, let me read that again. "What do you mean, congratulations?" he asked. "He really doesn't know," said Jijibo, wriggling with pleasure. "Your family has been noticed, Magister Vieki. Yes, your family has been noticed in some very high places." Vieki had no idea what the Queen's strange relative meant, but the words still chilled him. "I'm afraid I don't understand." "No, you don't, do you? Not yet. But then again, it is not always good to be noticed, is it? After all, look at that one." Jijibo pointed it to something behind Vieki, then turned and trotted away up the stairs, laughing and talking to himself. Confused, Vieki looked back and saw Marshal Muyare being led out of the chamber of the well by his officers, some consoling him over his loss, others congratulating him on the singular honor he had been given. The High Marshal did not look at any of them, but stared ahead helplessly, as lost and baffled as if he had been struck by lightning. Chapter 11. The Third Duke. People had dressed warmly, and the great chapel of St. Helvard's Cathedral smelled of furs and grease and torch smoke. Miriamel had thought she was impervious to the reek of many people pressed together, but she was feeling dizzy. Froda, the escritor of Elvritshala, was ancient and not particularly swift of foot. As he ascended to the pulpit, the Queen found herself wanting to help push him up the stairs, but reminded herself that patience with others, especially the old and infirm, was one of the virtues the Adon had most emphatically preached. When he reached his spot, the escritor took a pair of lenses and a frame from his gold vestments and perched them on the bridge of his long, thin nose. "Morghennes used to have something just like that," Simon whispered to her. "It's called a spectacle." Froda looked out over the gathering, which, in addition to the visitors from the south, comprised several hundred of Rimmersgard's most important people and cleared his throat. To Miriamel, it felt like the trumpet of an invading army. She had never liked funerals, and she liked them even less at her age, when they were no longer rare occurrences. "Long ago," the Escritor began, his voice reedy but surprisingly strong, "these lands were a wilderness, a place where darkness of all kinds ruled. Before we came to Rimmersgard, our people lived across the ocean in Isgard, a green land in the west, and although they prospered there, they did not thank God for their fortune, but worshipped instead the pagan demons of their fathers. Because of their heedlessness, the Lord sent a great catastrophe. The greatest mountain of that land burst into flames and fell down upon their chiefest cities, and all the skies went dark. Then Elfrid, far-seeing, led his people in their many ships through that darkness and across the ocean to this land, and thus were his people saved. And he built in these lands a great kingdom for himself, and his children ruled after him. The mightiest of those was Fingil, and during his life he ruled from the Himmelfels south to the Glenivent, and was called Fingil the Great." Fingil the Great, Miriamel thought. Or, as the people called him who had lived here before the Northmen came, Fingil the Bloody-Handed. What does any of this nonsense have to do with dear Isgrimner? She looked sadly at their old friend's coffin, draped in the banners of his house and of Elfridshala, with the ducal crown perched atop them all. "But Elfrid's people brought their old gods into this new land," the Escritor went on, "and still did not heed the words of our Lord, the true God. So the Lord sent unto them a punishment, the great dragon, who came into the Hayholt and destroyed King Icferdig, Fingil's successor, driving our people back into the northernmost lands, home of Norns and giants and other grim enemies. And although Adonite priests like our Saint Helvard tried to save our people from the Lord's wrath by leading them to the true faith, it was King John of Erkenland, the mighty Prester John, who slew the great dragon and finally brought the Lord God to his proper seat in Rimmersgard. Later, John fought the last king of Rimmersgard, Jormgrun Redhand, who carried the relics and token of the old gods into battle, and at Narved, Prester John defeated him. And then John, in his wisdom, chose that good man Isbjorn from all the other nobles to rule the people of this new conquered land, but only if Isbjorn would cast away his false gods and accept the true God, who sent his son Usiris to die that man might live forever. Duke Isbjorn did embrace the true God, praised the highest, and afterward ruled long and well. His son Isgrimner ruled even longer than his father had, granted a long life by the God he served so faithfully, and today it is that life we celebrate. Our beloved Duke Isgrimner fought the Lord's battles up and down the length of Ostenard. He battled the barbarians of the Thrithings and the terrible Storm King at the very gates of the Hayholt, John's capital, helping to save it and the Adonite people, perhaps all people, from destruction. And then Isgrimner pursued the Norns all the way to their foul seat in the Nornfels, driving them into hiding with so much loss that they have not troubled mankind again. Now our beloved Duke is with the Lord once more. Now he sits at the right hand of a master even greater than King John Presbyter. But he has not left us unguarded. His son, Grimbrand, will take up the sea rover's crown and rule over all the lands of Rimmersgard under John's high ward in the name of John's heirs, King Saelman and Queen Miriamel. 2 dukes Rimmersgard has been given under God's leadership, and now a third to come, another godly man, and peace has prevailed. Here the Ysgryther paused to remove his lenses and polish them on his stole. Miriamel felt a tickle of hope that the long afternoon might be coming to an end, at least the part that took place in the smoky, draughty cathedral. As far as she was concerned, it could not end too soon. The days since the Duke's passing had been filled with every kind of obligation. She had met so many northern nobles she could no longer remember what Grimbrand... Let me start that one again. She had met so many northern nobles she could no longer remember what Grimbrand had told her about a single one of them. But let us remember that God's favor is only granted to the righteous, Ysgryther Froda resumed in a ringing voice. As Grimbrand follows his father and grandfather as the 3rd Duke of Elfritsala, let us remember that we must all follow him in the ways of the Lord, for only by God's hand can our people survive and prosper. To the Queen's relief, he then led the congregation in the final prayers of the Mansa Sea Quilassen. She reached out for Simon, wanting to feel her husband's warm, real presence. He jumped a little, perhaps startled to be reminded of what was going on around him, but after a moment folded his large hand around hers. "It's bloody strange, if you ask me," Simon said as they followed the Duke's effigy out to the dock. "In the old days, the Rimmersmen used to burn all their dead," she explained. "Yes, and in the old days, Rimmersmen used to kill Erkenlanders as well, not to mention Sithy and everyone else." "Shh! Do you want Grimbrand to hear you?" The Duke's heir walked only a few yards behind them with his wife and children. Behind them came his Grimner's daughters, Signy and Ismay, and their husbands Valfrid and Tongerd of Skogi. Signy was a grandmother herself now, Miri realized. She was overwhelmed once more by the realization of how the years had spun on so swiftly since they had last visited, since Signy had been a pink-cheeked bride and Grimbrand a youth with his first beard. But it had been a long time since anyone had thought him a youth. He had waited long, patient years to take his father's place. Grimbrand was a good man, and she felt sure Rimmersgard was in trustworthy hands, but it still felt strange beyond understanding to be following the great straw funeral effigy of Elvrit's ship, Sotfengsel, and to know that their friend Isgrimner was truly gone. "How did it come to be that we are the old ones now, Simon?" "Same way it always does." The sun was coming out now after a gray morning full of snow flurries, snow that had now all turned to puddles of water. Her husband squinted. "People tell you what to do. You do your best, but you don't always succeed. Then one day you realize that you're the one doing the telling." "Yes, but nobody is listening. Look at Grimbrand's son, Isvar. See how respectful he is. But where is our grandson? I have not seen him since the cathedral, slouching in the back. Morgan should be with us. At the very least, his disappearance is an insult to his Grimner's memory." Simon set his teeth. "I don't want to talk about Morgan. If he's crept off somewhere with his so-called friends again, I'll deal with him later. As it is, I'm so angry I'm half tempted to leave him out on the frost march to find his own way home." Miriamel was frustrated with her grandson, too, but it was slowly turning to a kind of desperation. No matter what they said or did, the boy seemed to go out of his way to disappoint them. "This is what I meant, husband. How did we become the old people, always furious with the young? It was not like we were so well behaved when we were of such an age. You were beaten more often than a lazy plough horse for not doing what you were told." Simon made a face. "Shem would never have done to a plough horse what Rachel used to do to me, with a broomstick, on the backs of my legs." "Shh!" said Miriamel, surprised into laughter despite the solemn occasion. "Not so loud. I dare say you had it coming." "Says the girl who ran away from the hayholt against her father's wishes, then from Naglemund against her uncle's, and then from our camp against everybody's wishes, even mine. You didn't try to stop me, you liar. You invited yourself along. I wanted to protect you. Even then. His face suddenly changed, the lines of his brow deepening. "Even then, I loved you more than anything, Miri." She was touched, but also saddened. "I know. And we have made a good life, haven't we? When it is our turn to be trundled off to Swertcliff, we won't have any regrets, will we?" He frowned. "How could we not have regrets? Is there nothing left you want to do?" "I don't know, my love. Sometimes I wonder whether the ideas I had when I was young weren't just foolishness. The things that seemed so clear then, well, they aren't nearly so clear now." Simon looked up to see the effigy ship being lowered to the water. "We're here. I still think it's damnably strange to make a puppet out of straw and burn it." "Don't curse. Everybody has their customs." "But the Rimmers folk hate the sea." "Because it has swallowed their home," she said, "and no matter what it has done, you can't defeat an ocean." They stopped and waited for the rest of the procession to come to a halt. When the boat was floating at the edge of the wide Gratuvask, and the straw figure that represented his Grimner's body had been laden with funeral gifts, a black-robed priest walked up the bank to offer the torch to Simon and Miriamel. As agreed, they declined, directing him to pass it to Grimbrand instead. The Duke's son, his wide frame and gray-shot black beard making him look eerily like the man they were all mourning, walked carefully down the muddy bank to the edge of the water, and, with a prayer no one else could hear, tossed the torch into the boat. The priest then pushed the flimsy craft out into the water. "His ship to the sea!" cried Ysgrytr Froda. "His soul to the sky!" The straw boat caught quickly, and the effigy of the Duke soon vanished in flames. As the burning boat drifted out into the current, for a moment it seemed that a piece of the setting sun had fallen into the great river. "My father, my uncle Josua, Camaris, Isgrimner, nearly all our elders are gone," Miriamel thought. "They have left us a world, but have they left us enough wisdom to protect it?" A wind swept down from the mountains and sent a scatter of sparks from the burning straw glittering across the river's back, to fall at last, hissing, into the water. Ah, you forgot to toast Saint Gutfrida." Sir Astrian was laughing so hard he could barely speak. "Fill another one for the prince." A few of the Northmen in the alehouse were laughing and catcalling too, but others looked a little less than pleased to have the day of the Duke's funeral turned into a drinking and toasting contest. Morgan was annoyed in turn by their disapproval. Hadn't they already toasted the late Duke with great thoroughness? Weren't the Rimmersmen supposed to be such great folk for drink? How could anyone have a funeral and not bend an elbow? Astrian took a new ale bowl and scooped up a healthy helping, sloshing some on the table as he did so. Olverus looked at the puddle, his long face sad. "You are wasting perfectly good drink." "No, I am sharing it with the gods of the north." Astrian folded Morgan's hands around the wooden bowl. "Do it properly this time, Highness." "But there are Aidenites here. said Morgan, staring at the liquid sloshing back and forth in his unsteady hands. Are they? Yes, they are. The old gods are old. Not as old as Porto, crowed Astrian. At the sound of his name, the ancient soldier groaned and lifted his head from the pillow of his arm. He peered slit-eyed at the prince. Highness, what are you doing here? We thought you were with your family. Oh, be quiet, Porto, you old broomstick, said Astrian. He's been here for an hour. A man can only be sad so long, Morgan declared. In truth, it had been that boar of an Elvertsala courtier who had driven him away from the funeral feast, Thane somebody or other. The old fool had visited the Hayholt once years ago, and, braced with this experience, had spent far too long forcing his patchy memories of Prince John Josua on John Josua's son. In an attempt to silence him, Morgan had even said, I scarcely remember my father. A terrible lie, but it had only sent the courtier into further windy wheezing about the wisdom and nobility of the late and lamented John Josua, and the tragedy of his early death, to the point where Morgan had felt his only choice was either to knock the man's head off or escape to a suitably quiet place and try to forget the yammering fool completely. Come now, my prince, Astrian urged. Leave the old beanpole Porto to his rest and his dreams of faded glory. Drink up. Right then. Morgan lifted the bowl high. A toast to Saint Gudfrida. May she watch over all tradesmen. Travelers, not tradesmen, Olvera said. You will have to drink another if you're not careful. There are surely worse fates, said Astrian. So, a toast to Saint Gudfrida. May she watch over all travelers. Morgan brought the bowl to his lips and downed the whole thing, although there was a bit of choking and spluttering at the end that Astrian tried to convince him would necessitate yet another bowl. No, by God, the prince said. Now it's your turn. I am going to piss. Not here, said Sir Porto. Begging your pardon, Highness, but not here, if you please. What, do you imagine I am some Frithing's barbarian? Morgan rose, not without a bit of work, and staggered toward the door of the ale-hall. It was strange how quiet this and the other taverns were today, the drinkers silent and almost sullen. It was not as if the Duke's death had been a surprise, not at his Grimner's advanced age. As he passed the innkeeper's daughter, a buxom young woman who looked as if she knew a few interesting things, Morgan spun to watch her walk. This maneuver did not turn out well, and he had to grab at a table for support, vexing a group of men sitting there. My very deepest apologies, Morgan told them, and bowed, which did not turn out much better than the spin. By the time he had reached the door, he had caromed off more tables, as though someone was using a prince to play ninepins. Damn Frostmarch Baron, he thought, more than a bit dizzy now. Tell me about my own father, why don't you? Oh, yes, can't shut him up. But was he there? Did he hear my father moaning and weeping in his last fever? See the look of fear on his face? Morgan shook his head, trying to rid himself of the evil memories that had settled on him like snow sifting down from the gray sky. But memories did not melt as swiftly as snowflakes. It was a great relief to empty his bladder against the outside wall of the alehouse, but Morgan could not escape the feeling he was being watched. He turned and found a hairy white monster staring up at him, fangs gleaming and red tongue lolling. He did not even realize that his knees had buckled and that he was now sitting on the slushy ground, until the little man standing beside the wolf extended a hand to him. Vakana is not a danger, he said. She did not mean to be frightening. which was easy enough to say, but a little harder to believe, at least for Morgan, as he stared at the wolf's powerful, grinning jaws just inches from his face. "You're that troll," he said at last. "Grandfather's friend." The little man nodded and smiled. "Binnabick, I am being called. Yes, a troll. And your grandfather's friend, yes, and forever. And you are being Prince Morgan." "Believe so." "You sure he won't bite?" "He?" The troll looked around. "Ah, it is Wakana you are meaning. She? No, she will not bite." He looked up. Several locals were watching their conversation, and not all of them looked particularly friendly. "She will not bite unless I am telling her bite," the troll corrected himself. Morgan ignored the offered hand and climbed slowly to his feet, just in case the wolf was not as committed to pacifism as her master. He noticed that he had not done up his clothing quite as well as he'd thought, and paused to remedy the situation, grateful he had not pissed himself completely at the unexpected sight of the white wolf. He felt quite sober now. Terror might have been the cause, but he told himself it was the cold wind. Living in such a chilly, gray place, it was a miracle these Rimmersgard folk ever chose to be sober. Finished with the laces on his breeks, he regarded the troll and the grinning wolf. He managed at last. "I have to go back to my friends now." He knew he should say something else, because his grandparents were bound to hear of the meeting, so he added, "I give you good day," with all the drunken articulation he could muster. But the little man would not stop staring at him. The troll's eyes were brown and quite disturbingly intent. "I was seeing you in the church earlier, when they spoke for Duke Isgrimner," Benedict said. "You had a look of sadness, was my thought. Were you knowing that good old man well?" "Oh, God save me," Morgan thought. "He knows I'm drunk, and he's forcing me to talk to him on purpose." "I never met the Duke before the day he died," he said. "No, once, I think, when I was a boy. He was big, and he had a loud voice." Unlike the lie he had told about his father, this was true. Morgan had not accompanied his grandfather on his last trip north, and almost all his knowledge about the Duke of Elvritsala came from his grandfather's long and doubtless exaggerated stories. Benedict's smile was wider this time. "Loud voice with certainty, like a great ram bellowing at his rivals. But there was being more to Isgrimner, much more." "I don't doubt it." Morgan wanted only to escape back into the lamplit dark and the company of ordinary people and ale. Why did everyone insist on talking to him about dead people today? "Still, I should find my family and I have been walking about the city in this evening once the Duke's funeral was ended," said Benedict. "Your grandmother, the Queen, had worry that we would be abused by the people here, because for long, long years these folk and mine were being each other's enemies. And still there are many Kruhok, Rimmersmen, who are not liking to see trolls. But I like learning always, and seeing and doing is being the best way for that learning. Are you not thinking the same?" "Huh? I suppose, yes." Morgan was a hair's breadth from turning his back and going inside. "Yes, learning is certainly good." "I am glad we have agreeing," Benedict said, nodding and smiling, "because here is coming my daughter Kina and little Snenek, her Nukapik, her betrothed, you would be saying. Kina has a weariness of the city now, and would return to the place where we sleep, but Snenek still has a desire to learn more of Rimmersgard ways. It would be a kindness for you to show him something of this place." "Show him?" Yes, Prince Morgan, this place, where you and your friends are resting and eating, would be something he would like, I think. Little Snenick is loving to join in such pastimes, and is considered very skillful at singing, games, contests. Bennebick must have seen the expression of horror on Morgan's face, because he quickly added, "You are not to be fearing. Snenick has coins of his own. But, and here they are coming to us now." Bennebick turned and waved to a pair of figures approaching through the narrow, night-dark street. Both were dressed in thick hide jackets, and both seemed small to Morgan, although one was much smaller than the other. The troll's daughter, he guessed. He could tell by the curve of her hips and an indefinable something in her round face that the smaller one was female. Morgan had seen dwarfs in Irchester and occasionally the Hayholt, mostly with troops of traveling players, but trolls seemed to be different. They were stocky and short-legged, but otherwise their proportions were more like that of other folk. The troll's daughter had a pretty face, with almond eyes and smooth tan skin, and she was even shapely as far as could be told under such heavy garments, but she stood no higher than Morgan's own little sister, Lilia. By contrast, the top of the young male troll's thatch of black hair reached almost to Morgan's breastbone. "Ah, Kina, my daughter, you are here," said Bennebick. "Come and greet Prince Morgan. And this fellow is being her friend, little Snenick." "It does pleasure to meet you, Highness Morgan." Tina crossed her arms before her chest in a gesture Morgan didn't understand. Was she bowing, or did it mean something else? He was still dizzily full of juniper-scented ale, and seemed to have missed his chance to flee, so he gave her a sickly smile and nodded and mumbled the sort of thing he did when he was talking to people he didn't know, but his grandparents were watching. Little Snenick did not look particularly odd to be meeting a prince of the high royal household, but crossed his arms the same way Kina had, bobbed his head like a quail, and announced, "Ah, of course. This is a momentous meeting." Morgan had no idea what that meant either. As Bennebick spoke rapidly in the troll tongue to the new arrivals, the prince cast his eyes desperately toward the alehouse door, hoping one of his friends might come out to look for him. He felt a small, cool pressure on his hand and looked down to see that Kina had removed her glove and was squeezing the tips of his fingers. He said, rather helplessly. "I taught her the handclasp of freshness that you Utku, lowlanders, as we say in Yikanuk, are using," Bennebick explained. Friendship, and thank you," she said, still holding the end of his hand in her small, solid grip, "for showing to little Snenick more of this place. Because of my wearying now it is kindness, and you are showing to be a true primp." "Prince," said Bennebick gently. "Prince," said Kina, blushing a little and finally letting go of his hand. "You are a true prince." Escape impossible, and all other resistance now thoroughly dismantled, Morgan could only wait as the young troll woman rubbed cheeks with her betrothed, then followed her father back down the long street in the direction of Elvritsala Castle, the massive white wolf pacing beside them. Loiterers, who might otherwise have been calling abuse at the trolls, took one look at Vakana and slipped away. Morgan was not entirely certain what had just happened, but he was already wishing it hadn't. "And so we will entertain ourselves like true Rimmersgarders now, eh?" announced his new companion, his grin so wide it seemed to squeeze his eyes shut. "The prince and little Snenick. Bring out ale and stinking fish." Then, as they made their way back inside, the troll said, "My someday father-in-law is a very good man." The prince did not reply. Most of the alehouse denizens had looked up when they pushed open the squeaking door, and many of them looked displeased by his new companion. "Because I told him it was needed for you and I to meet," the troll went on. "I am going to help you, you see." "Help me?" By the love of all the saints, Morgan wondered. How far back into this poxy place were his friends sitting? Surely he hadn't traveled such a distance on the way out. "How are you going to help me?" "As I told my father-in-law to be, the singing man Binabik, I will help you to find your destiny, just as he was doing for your illustrious grandsire, the King Theoman." The prince made a firm decision to ignore everything this little moon-mad creature said from that point onward. Also, his grandfather's tiny friend Binnywick had deliberately picked Morgan out for this suffering, and he would neither forget nor forgive. Old Varus was right, he thought. Little people can't be trusted. And that is where we are going to stop, because there's quite a long scene that follows this one, and there's no sense in starting it now. Anywho, let me double check to make sure we're still on board here. Okay. All right, my dears. So with that, I am going to wrap it up for the night and go see if anybody has fetched in any food. Or else I will have to go out and kill my own. So don't be walking around my neighborhood if you're small and weak and covered with lovely chops and roasts and other parts. Anyway, no, I wouldn't kill and eat anybody, much less one of my readers. Never, 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 never. Anyway, okay. So with that, I am going to wrap it up. So I want to thank you for joining me. As always, it is a huge pleasure to have friends come and hang out for the reading. If I didn't get a chance to say hello to you, I apologize. It's the limitations of Facebook at the moment, which maybe when we get moved back into the new house and I have to start all these things all over again, I can figure out or come up with a better solution. But frankly, life has just been too fraught lately for me to deal with anything except what is directly in front of me. What is directly in front of me right now is you, and so I will say to you, good night, take care, or good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're watching this. Take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, take care of the people around you, and together we will all manage to get through somehow. So, peace, best wishes as always, and I'll see you very soon.